Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to PMI Live, Design Principles and Continuous Improvement. And today we have with us Rich Seddon and Warren Knight. For those of you who know me, it's great to see you and have you with us. And for those of you who don't, I'm Susanna Clark, and I'm going to be facilitating today's session. So PMI Live, as its name suggests, it's a live and interactive experience. So today we're going to be obviously presenting some slides, but we're also going to be having some conversations. We're going to be using polls. We're also going to be using a Miro collaboration board. So we are looking for you to participate with all of these. And at all times, we've got the chat open. So please do enter any of your comments into the chat, pose any questions, and I will obviously share those with Rich and Warren. Hello to everyone who's also joining us via our live streams on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. We'd love for you to join us, and you can use all of these features if you come on in, and you can do that by registering right now at pmi.co.uk/webinars. So do register and do come and join us. So let's get started with some introductions. Warren, can I ask you to go first, please?
Sure, thanks, Suze. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Warren Knight, and I am a Director Consultant and Head of Strategy Practice here at PMI.
Thank you very much. And Rich?
Hi, folks. So my name is Rich Seddon. I'm one of the managing partners at PMI, particularly involved in corporate strategy design and also new client program design and client management as well. So Suze is looking at me, and for the second time today, I was slightly panic-stricken there because I thought I was going to have to do the introduction without a script when I appeared on camera. So I do know what's happening, Suze. Don't worry, we can all calm down. We've known each other long enough now to know that look she just gave me with her left eye meant it's meant to be you, mate. Anyway. Let's start as we mean to go on, folks. Incidentally, Suze didn't mention this is the last PMI Live before the we've just taken a month's summer break. So next month in August there won't be one. So forgive us if we're a little demob happy here. It's going to be a good one. Let's hope. So design principles is the theory that we'll be discussing today. Some of you may be familiar with this topic. I'm just going to share my screen and then show you exactly what we'll be talking through during the session. So let's give that a go, and hopefully this is going to oblige and should appear now.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I'm lacking the magic green ring again, so we may have problems later on, folks, but we'll see how we go. As long as you can see that now. So we're going to talk about introduction first of all, design thinking and principles, and explain the distinction between those very shortly. We're going to talk about the key phases of it, some of the benefits, and then we're going to make a proposition for some of the differences between the design thinking in improvement programs versus projects or process improvement initiatives. And we'll again talk about why we make that distinction later on. Now, some of you may already be familiar with the concept. If so, and please do, as Sue said, keep your questions, queries, comments, and also we'd really, if you do use design thinking or design principles in your CI projects or programs or in your organizations, we'd really like your observations as discussion points. So keep us on our toes, keep us busy, see what you think of the content we've put together for you today. So before we get into the body, let me just set out the stall a little bit here. So what's the purpose of design thinking and design principles in the continuous improvement setting? It's about solution generation, but getting practical and creative with problem solving and linking that problem solving and those problem solving activities to customer needs. And you'll hear me say over and over again the role of the customer in this. And if you take one thing away from today, it's that in design principles and design thinking, the customer needs and customer pain points, as we call them, come first. Typically, and this is where some of you may have experienced it if you don't use it already in your continuous improvement programs, design thinking and design principles are used in the product design and service design fields, and sometimes in the engineering fields as well. So you may have come across it there. And then final point I'm going to say as an introduction is it lends itself perfectly to Plan, Do, Study, Act, PDSA, by definition, it is an iterative approach. And again, we'll talk through a lot of the detail as we step through. I should say we've got an exercise and a case study later on as well to step you through. And hopefully as we piece this thing together, the concept will start coming and some of the benefits that you can gain for your improvement programs will start coming together. So first thing I'd like to do is understand who we've got in the room. So on the challenge that I set earlier on, to let us know if you do use design thinking or design principles, let's ask this formally in a poll. Suze, I think you're going to share that on screen shortly.
I am.
The question we're asking,
launched.
there we go. So the question we're asking is, do you use design thinking or principles in your organization? Select all that apply. Answer number 1 is for continuous improvement. 2, product design or service design. For strategy deployment, we don't use it, or I don't know. Or perhaps there's an answer we haven't thought of. If so, pop it in the chat and let us know. So thankfully, we can see people have got access to that, and it's starting to
they
pop
have,
in,
yes,
and
that's starting to populate nicely. Thank you very much. As Rich said, it is definitely a multiple choice. So therefore you can choose more than one, obviously, and please do feel free. The more data we get, the better understanding we'll have.
And just to reiterate, the reason there is no right or wrong with this question, the reason we're asking is just to get a feel for experience, because it's quite difficult to garner. I should say in our client base, we see some practice in the service and product design area, quite a lot in IT coding and IT service design, and then a little bit in the continuous improvement sector. So if you are using it in continuous improvement, that'd be really interesting to explore further and see what you make of some of the theories that we're proposing. Okay, so Suze,
so I think that's
like we're up.
Steady down. So I'm going to then share those results with you all. Hopefully everyone can see that now.
Okay.
Rich, Warren, I'd be interested in your perspectives on whether that was what you were expecting to see.
Well, just from a data interpretation point of view, I'm gonna just remind myself of something here. Although it is multiple choice, you could choose more than one. I think we're safe to assume that it'll be an exclusive choice on I don't know or we don't. So let's bear that in mind. And then the other 3, it might be a mix of them. So what this is saying to me is there's a whole chunk that don't currently use it as far as people know. And then we've got in the rest of the results show that people are using it in a continuous improvement setting, are using it in the product and service design, and very few in the for strategy deployment, which is interesting. So what was I expecting from that? I would have thought the continuous improvement and strategy deployment would have been either closer or the other way around would be my best guess. So that's intriguing. If anyone's got any theories on that, let us know as we go through.
Warren, any other surprises for you, or exactly what you were expecting?
Not surprising, but encouraging, particularly to see the results around continuous improvement. I think today is a good opportunity to reinforce our focus upon how we look to design and redesign our processes in particular.
Super. Thanks everybody, and thank you very much for sharing your views.
Brilliant. Thanks, Suze. So let's just have a think about the environments. Thankfully, the 2 that have popped up, we have some detail on. I'm not sure what my contingency plan was if that had presented a different argument. I'm sure we'd have worked it out. So let's think about this in the product or service design field. In the intro, I mentioned this concept of customer pain point. Design principles revolves around a keen and acute understanding of the needs of your users and putting those front and center to all the solutions that you generate. Also enables you to test back potential solutions against those pain points that you identified. Now, sometimes that requires quite different types of methods of understanding your customer journey, your customer experience, the voice of your customer. Talk about that a bit more later on. Take this concept now that you've studied the customer journey and the actual user's journey and user experience of your service, of your process, and identify the pain points. You take those pain points and translate them into design principles. And it's against those design principles and I'll show you some examples later on, that we ideate, so generate ideas, we test, and we pilot solutions against them. As I mentioned earlier on as well, PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, features throughout this approach. It is by its very nature iterative, and if it isn't, it has failed and will fail. Certainly your approach has failed and your solutions will likely fail if it is not iterative. This does not work on a principle of right first time with your potential solutions, both in the product and service arena and the process arena. So from those design principles, we translate those into product or service attributes. You could potentially swap the word attributes to features. There's a whole argument to be had around whether you would do that or not. I know a couple of people that are in the audience would vigorously disagree with me on that one. It's potential. Sometimes people do crossover. But let's take it as attributes. And it's those attributes that create the customer value. Now, here's the key. I mentioned earlier on about check back. This loop down the bottom here, the solutions that deliver the customer value, you can reconcile those back and check those back against the problems, i.e. the pain points at any point in the process. So that in mind, so if we're thinking there, we've got product and service design. So what does it look like when we put it into the process design? So the continuous improvement world, where we're re-engineering, we're redesigning or designing new processes. And it looks like that. Not radically different. The only change from our point of view is the process, that you change product or service attributes to process attributes. So I wouldn't get too hung up on that difference, to be honest, or the language within it. That said, obviously the continuous improvement environment is different and there are some different features. So if we think about the dimensions of design thinking, I've started to touch on these already. At its core, it's people-centric. So regardless of whether you're working on an automated process, a digital process, a physical process, an industrial chemical process, somewhere there will be human contact within that process, be it the creation of it, the receipt of an end result of it. So bear that in mind. If all processes have a social element of some variety, no matter how abstract they seem from the real world, and I'm particularly thinking digital processes here, because some of them just happen there and no one ever sees them. But somewhere along the line, if we accept the proposition that all organizations are a system of processes, somewhere there will be a customer or a user of an output from one of those processes. So let's accept that first of all. And on that basis, it's really key to make design thinking successful that you don't assume that you know your customer needs. We've got some great examples of that later on. So what I'm saying here is bear in mind the social element. There will be human contact somewhere in here. There will be a human people-centric element of it somewhere. And you may need to challenge your current understanding and current assumptions around your customer's needs in order to make this successful. Ambiguity, as I mentioned with the PDSA comments early on, Plan, Do, Study, Act, ambiguity is par for the course on this. It is innate within design thinking. You will experience what I've called here muddy waters. If you're successfully innovating, ambiguity should be unavoidable. Now, don't misunderstand me or misinterpret here. I'm not saying we're flying blind here without any idea of where we're going or any direction. Using the PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act methodology, you have safe experimentation, but it's this experimentation that is crucial for successful development of innovative solutions that may challenge some of your current process designs, process thinking, and indeed your assumptions around the customer and consumer needs. Now, on the subject of redesign, Warren touched on, and I tried to make a note as he said it because it was quite profound earlier on around design and redesign. All process design is by definition redesign, and that same applies for product and service, to be honest. And my point of saying this is that the context that you're operating in or the technology that you're using may change. That doesn't mean you don't need to revalidate user needs. And you'll sense this recurring theme here. Validate, understand, seek to challenge your current understanding of your customer pain points, of what your customer values from the process that you're attempting to redesign and or improve or design for the first time, for that matter, using design thinking techniques. And then the demonstration part. There's engaging in cultural change is always difficult. One of the things that can help here, and design thinking can support, is the concept of, again, PDSA simulations, prototypes, and tests can help make your process design ideas easier to communicate. Now, why do I put that in here? It's because by the very nature, some of this stuff will generate some blue sky thinking that challenges current paradigms and current norms. Those aren't always easy to communicate to others within your organization or to your customers. And again, we've got some examples of that in the case studies later on. Suze, I can see you've got your hand up.
So just a question through the chat, which probably relates to the previous couple of slides around design principles and your thoughts on how those design principles fit in an agile world. And that's been the big A.
Yeah, agile world, the big A. Absolutely compatible. Indeed, I've yet to see an example where they couldn't be used. That's not to say, and sorry, I missed earlier on, we're not proposing that all agile or CI improvements need to use design thinking. That's not what we're proposing here. This is an additional tool for your kit bag. So in an agile world, things like the staging of projects into different phases, into different sprints, for example, absolutely compatible with this. The need to demonstrate, to use simulations, use prototyping, absolutely key. What it adds to many agile approaches is a really good, clean link to those customer requirements and customer pain points.
Super, thank you.
And I think actually, Rachel, if I can just add, I think for me, it's about setting this true north, if you like, based upon those customer needs. All processes currently, as you experience them in your organizations, will be designed based upon a set of principles. Okay, but they may not be known to you. But those principles, of course, will drive the behavior of the process. What we're trying to do here, I think, Rich, is we're trying to be much more conscious of what those principles are and establishing those principles in the context of the customer, so that we're much more conscious and focused in the way that we drive our redesigns of our processes. So, and then the agile bit works very well with that.
Oh, absolutely, and it supports it brilliantly, to be honest, and it can inform your tests, can inform your stage gating, and also you'll see there's two propositions we're putting forward shortly for in a process improvement using design thinking and in a program, and I think you'll see both of those resonate in the agile world as well.
Super, thank you both, and thank you very much, John, for your question.
Excuse me. Okay, so those of you who may be familiar, many of you may be familiar with the PMI improvement cycle. We've also got a DMAIC cycle in the middle here. I'm putting this up here just as a demonstration to, and I could have added an agile cycle round here as well, thinking about it. I've put this up here just to demonstrate how the PDSA linkages with design thinking comes together in an environment where you're using a model like DMAIC or the improvement cycle. Now, first thing that we note on this is, as common with any improvement proposition, being clear on the purpose is important, and it's particularly important in the design thinking environment that you need an intimate knowledge of the process users and customers' needs. Now, that is quite challenging, actually, because what this will expose, if you bear that in mind, is that at the point of selecting priorities, you may not yet know. You may not yet know. You may have a theory as to an area that needs to work on, and that's fine. Think about the PDSA. What we're doing here is identifying that we have a gap. So in the learn about the process phase, the measurement phase, which includes understanding the voice of your customer, new things are needed. And the question you're asking yourself here is, how well are customer needs being met currently, and by what means, i.e. understand the process and understand what those customer needs are. That will surface current customer needs, your current understanding. So things like satisfaction surveys that you may currently do, or feedback that you get through non-conformance or something like that. How is that process performing to meet those customer needs compared to spec, depending on your environment, SLAs, you name it. Where are those customer needs within there? Now, what this exposes is a really interesting situation here, where as you learn about the process and you're understanding the current process, that can influence your thinking as to what the future state should look like. Now, this isn't us suggesting that you should disregard that, but you do need to be conscious of it. And I think this is particularly relevant in things like IT settings and where you're being driven by system functionality. Warren, I think when we were chatting this through earlier on this morning, you made a couple of good points here, which I'm sure putting you on the spot now to expect you to remember, but let's go for it.
Right, thanks, Rich. So yeah, I mean, I just want to reiterate, first of all, it's incredibly difficult to remove ourselves from the current paradigm. You know, this is how we've always done it. So it's very difficult to step out of that and to be truly generative in our designs rather than being adaptive to what we've already got. But it's back to that, you know, how conscious are we of the customer requirement and the, you know, the principles by which we're driving our design. Often, a client not so long ago, you know, built a process, you know, based upon the constraints of the IT system, essentially, rather than the customer. And what that meant was, it was to do with processing multi-item applications. And if there was an issue with just one of those items in the application, then the whole application was rejected because the system couldn't do it any other way. And what that meant ultimately was customer dissatisfaction, large levels of rework. So, you know, we got to be careful around these things.
And just building on that example, if design principles had been used to identify those customer requirements, those customer needs, it would greatly have helped and removed the element of surprise when customers were disappointed with the end solution if that had been in the development process. As soon as I know the example you're talking about, and as soon as I saw that, that struck me that this could have helped. And actually, it's got particularly with off-the-shelf systems, it's got a really interesting role to play.
Yeah, and just one more point about that. With clearer thought around the customer, and therefore some clear design principles about how you wanted to engage with the customer around these applications, you know, still using the same system. Okay, we could have come to a different sort of way of processing that same system, same constraints, which would have been much better.
Yeah, Suze, I can see you raised
your
hand.
Yes, another question about redesign. And the question is, you know, is there a stage when you need to look internally at what you're doing? And their observation is that, you know, perhaps sometimes when you're driving to meet that customer spec and their needs, sometimes, you know, or errors and wastes are then carried forward into that future work and future design.
So whoever asked that question or made that observation has seen my slides, because later on we have a great example of just that situation. Yes, and so my point here is be conscious of it. If it's an existing process, be conscious of the risk of allowing the current process and your current understanding of the customer needs to bias your theories and your ideation as you try to generate other solutions. So as we move through that and we go into the area of investigating sources of variation and waste and analyze, you need to be clear here. What are the pain points? New methods will have been required in the previous step to understand that. That may be walking the customer's journey yourself, disregarding sources of data that you currently have potentially, or testing them if they exist. Are they accurate? Are they true? In-depth interviews and studies of customers or potential users to understand what does their day-to-day activity look like with this. And I have to say, one of the surprises, I've forgotten where I was last night, but wherever I was was having a really interesting conversation over dinner last night with one of my colleagues. I've just remembered. Sorry, Des. Which was about the interest that we gain from our client work, but it never ceases to amaze me of the biases that can come in, and the settings. I can't remember why this came up yesterday, but the settings where we see with clients where people actually don't understand what their customers are doing with their product and service, because it's been in flight for so long. It was unrelated to this webinar entirely, but it really does apply here. It struck a chord with me when I was going through the slides this morning. So moving on from there, you're in the idea generation, the testing of theories based on the findings in the previous stages. I've put in brackets slightly glibly, this is not guesswork. None of this. I mean, people often see blue sky thinking or radical solutions or solutions that aren't bound by current constraints as being potentially a bit off the wall, a bit out there, a bit wacky, for want of a better word. Using the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle and methodology properly, it is not. It is not guesswork. These are carefully planned experiments, simulations, testing. Test your theories. And if he doesn't say it in a moment, I'll say it for him now. What Warren may say here is what you're setting out to do is to disprove those theories, not prove them. As with all good science, your hypothesis is just that. It is a hypothesis and is there to be challenged. So when you get to the implementation, the standardize and review phase, it's not a finished state. This is iterative, as I said up front, and see the last comment about guesswork. Implementation isn't guesswork, which removes a lot of the elements of risk from this. And I think that's one of the things that often gets lost in translation. And that slide I showed earlier on with the loop back, the loop to check those those potential solutions against customer requirements will help you greatly to keep your solutions meaningful and relevant to the customer. But as with all things, pragmatism is a requirement, and I'll talk about that shortly. So how can it help? Design thinking and continuous improvement can encourage creativity and innovation. Hopefully that message is starting to come across, and we're portraying that accurately. It does and can provide a means to break free of the constraints of the current process design, as Warren said, and that can be system-wise, or it can be existing in-flight process-wise. And I've rather boldly put this point here, that the human-centric emphasis can, underline that can, not will, reduce resistance to change. It's a more engaging format, and you've got more evidence and an additional data source to add to your CI initiatives if you truly understand your customer requirements in a different way. That design thinking, design principles can support. So secondly, on these benefits and the potential gains here, collaborative working. The benefits of collaborative working are well established and well known. This approach can encourage that even further. Why? Because it requires experimentation using PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act. Note the order of the words here. Initially, I put requires collaborative working when I wrote this slide, and then I looked at it and thought about it. I thought, actually, no, they're the wrong way around. It encourages collaborative working, but it does require experimentation. And why does it require that? Because it depends, its success depends on robust feedback loops. And robust doesn't just mean it comes in regularly or everyone fills in the survey. It means we understand the process by which that feedback is being obtained. We understand the customer journey from which that feedback derives. And we understand what happens within the whole process. So that system of processes that I talked about earlier on. I'm starting to develop this picture that potentially you could see you're being overwhelmed by data, but actually that's not the case in this circumstance. What this can help is to cut through some of that volume of data, because the customer-centric nature of it, the customer needs, the customer pain points come first, which makes for some really interesting prioritization exercises when evaluating potential solutions. So let's think about this in at a process level. You could for this read continuous improvement, and sorry, CI is continuous improvement for those of you not familiar with the abbreviation. So at the continuous improvement process or project level, so something like a green belt project, black belt project level, let's think about how design principles can help. First thing I'd say is the point Warren made earlier on about this true north. It helps create the true north for improvement efforts, linked to the point below, which is around focus. Now, as we've all been there, I'm sure, as we start implementing and designing new processes, there's loads of exciting things to pick off the tree, loads of features or attributes that we'd like to build in. And it's very easy to get distracted by those. Layer on that system capabilities, potentially, if it's an IT process you're designing, and you've got a massive risk of losing focus. One of the things that the design principles enable you to do is go back to that true north. Are these things, are these solutions, these attributes going to address those pain points? Yes or no? Or is the process as a whole, the redesigned as a process as a whole, going to help us address those pain points and therefore deliver a new experience or an improved experience to the customer? If no, then perhaps we're on the wrong track. See comment about pragmatism previously. So I mentioned the customer front and center of those improvement efforts, really easy to get distracted. And then you've got this concept of balance. It's a check and balance to check back. Are they relevant to those pain points? Have we addressed all those pain points? If not, are we comfortable that we are not addressing some of those pain points? And are we confident in the consequences of not doing so? Raises all of these questions, and what we're trying to do here is add different look at problems from multiple angles. So you've got all of your classic green belt and black belt tools in your kit bag. Let's try and add some extra perspectives on this. Why are we doing that? To enable more reliable decisions to be made in your process design. So on that note, we have a case study and an exercise coming up. The environment we're talking here is a home loan application, so a mortgage application process potentially. This is a real example. We've obviously anonymized it and simplified it down to take out a lot of the detail to get across the key principles. And in this circumstance, the customer survey data suggested there was a high level of customer dissatisfaction with the application process. Fundamentally, this winding journey that the customer experienced was from apply to review, usually some clarifications, ultimately arriving at a destination, maybe in a distance there. Could be a bit more twisty and turny than this infographic describes, where your application is either approved or declined. So thinking about that, we've got an exercise we'd like to do. We're going to use the Miro whiteboard, interactive whiteboard for this. Very shortly, Susie's going to share the link to that.
That's in the chat now for everybody.
Oh, she's on the ball today.
Hey.
It's in the chat, and it is, and it'll also require a password in there,
which is also in the chat.
Look at this. You couldn't wish for any more, could you? Look at this.
Hot to trot.
Marvelous. So thinking about it, just to recap what we're thinking about here, and the question we're about to pose you is asking some questions about your experience of such a process, a typical process like this, of a home loan application process or similar. And in this circumstance, as I mentioned, the customer survey suggested there was a high level of customer dissatisfaction. Now, this is where my screen exchange may not be as smooth as it could be. Has that worked, ladies and gents?
So, yeah, so basically, everybody, what I'm looking you to do is click that link. You'll be asked for a password. The password is in the chat for you. You can put that in, and then it should take you to the board. I can see several of you are already arriving, which is fantastic.
Fantastic.
Warren, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So whilst we're waiting for everybody to get on, so let me just tell you quickly about the exercise. So what we'd like to do is thinking about your interaction with similar processes to this. I'm sure many of you have gone through an application for a mortgage, or maybe another big purchase like a nice car. And I'd just like you to think about your experiences of such processes, and what were the pain points that you experienced. Okay. So if you just drop down a little bit there, Rich, what you can see is we've got lots of blank post-it notes. If you just want to double click on, find one, double click on it, add your details, okay, of your pain point. And then, Rich, again, if you'd like to just drop down a bit further, I'd then like you to put your pain point, okay, on this distribution from low severity. In other words, it was a mild pain for you, up to 5, it was a severe pain for you. Okay, really important customer requirement. So looks like everybody's starting to beaver away here, which is great.
So I will put a timer on this if one of my colleagues could advise me where the timer seems to have vanished off to.
That feels like something that I ought to be able to answer.
That was a request for help there, Warren.
Yes,
Meanwhile, folks, carry on. We can see
was.
you're busy.
How sort of long would you like to put it on?
Let's do another 3 minutes on this, I think.
3 minutes. Let's see if I can do that for us.
Right, so while that's just closing out, I'm going to start the review. So bearing in mind, the question here was thinking about your interaction with similar process to this, what pain points have you experienced? So on the high severity end, we've got an automated service, no one to speak to, can't get through to the same person to continue the thread. I think we've all experienced these kind of things. No real estimate of time application response, entering details to structure / logic of the system, to limited details, too generic, delays in answering calls, out of scope requests. That sounds like someone that works in the system. Really great to hear from you. No reason for approving, no synergy between data from different bank processes, no updates provided, no ETAs. Long waits when no one is working on the application, how frustrating. Identification document requirements, length of time for decision making. What have we got in the middle zone here? We've got no status updates, lack of progress. So we've got recurring themes here. I think it's just clear to see.
And you know, in the sense of in the world of customer requirements, what I really like about looking at this is we do have recurring themes, and of course everybody is different as to how they weight the importance of that.
Absolutely.
How it
Variation.
Yeah,
indeed. Method of application, too many questions, chunky robotic customer services. Process, long delays between steps, doesn't work well on phones or tablets. Interesting. Chatbot not getting me to where I need it. I'm almost tempted to grab that chatbot one and sling it over to the right, but that would be tampering of the first order. So I will not do that. So thank you, folks. So what we've got here is an emerging picture of frustrations, no visibility of the process, long waits, no updates, not sure what's going on with this. So let's see how this compared to the case study that
Rich, before we go, what intrigues me often when talking to customers and finding out their requirements, and this goes back somewhat to, it's very difficult to pull ourselves away from the current process design. And often customers will express not a need, but they'll express a solution, okay? Or they'll express their need as there's a lack of a solution in place. So again, we're tied into a paradigm here. So there's a couple of good ones here about opening hours if face-to-face application. That's a solution, okay? Not providing updates, no ETA. So that would be a solution. So what's the need?
Yeah, great. Yeah, exactly. So with this kind of feedback, let's see what happened in the case study that we talked about earlier on. Hopefully I've switched back now. So here's what the customer feedback survey. So this was on close of application. All customers asked the some standard questions, rating the company, rating the experience. You've all been there, done that, seen those. And here were the two key recurring themes. One, first and foremost, the whole process takes too long. And second, the application was rejected. Okay, so application rejected is an interesting one. And both of which you could start diving into. Now, bear in mind, that's what the customer survey feedback. You could easily embark upon, based on that voice of the customer, we need to design a process that is shorter and has a higher success rate potentially. You could, not saying you would necessarily, it's all kind of issues around why an application might be rejected. But here's what happened when design thinking process was put into action. Now, the customer survey data was an interesting and useful source, but it wasn't the primary source. They decided they needed to validate it. Remember I was talking about validating your assumptions and knowledge of your customers? This particular organization undertook some detailed studies, some shadowing of applicants for mortgages, and some in-depth interviews with customers before they applied, during the application process, and after the application process. And to be representative, they had people that had been approved for their mortgage and people that had declined. They also had people that had had a compliant journey that was deemed successful, and included in that sample, they had people who had not had a good journey, so had cause to raise a complaint about the process or had had an escalation raised within it. The output of that was really intriguing. Their focus and the customer pain point was not any of these specifics, lots of which we've all experienced the symptoms of here, but it was actually the anxiety that their current process caused them was identified as being the biggest problem, which had a whole collection of inputs to, lots of which you've defined from your own experience. But it wasn't to make this process quicker, it became their purpose. It was to reduce customer anxiety. So their proposition here was to eliminate, we're going to improve this process by eliminating the causes of applicant anxiety from the application process in order to improve the customer experience. Boy, that's nuanced. It's pretty simple to understand and communicate, but that's quite different, isn't it, to that classic environment where we'd start saying, we need to keep people informed. We need to make this process faster because it takes too long, and we reject too many applications unnecessarily. What an interesting nuance. A symptom that's necessary that you wouldn't through classic forms pick up on, and then you start thinking about the context of it. Of course, it makes sense. Buying a home and needing a loan, needing a mortgage to do so, can jeopardize the sale and therefore the place, which is potentially the most precious thing humanity has after food and water, is a place to live and shelter. How can we not see that this is going to be a cause of anxiety? Yet these people that ran this process day in, day out without the design thinking approach hadn't seen that and had no means of responding to it. So what did they do? Bear in mind that purpose, to eliminate the causes of anxiety. So here were the customer needs: to know the approval/rejection criteria up front, to understand the process and where I am in that journey, to access meaningful real-time status of the application, of my application. So let's take each one of those in turn. So that customer need, the first one, to know the approval and rejection criteria. What does that translated into a design principle? Transparent decisions. All solutions we generate must provide transparency of our decisions. An example outcome, and again, this is simplified, is shown here. So they introduced a process. Before you apply, our criteria for this loan is ... Really clear, really simple, not buried in lots of different details. Real simple graphical tools. They also had, and these things are pretty common these days, a live pre-approval tool on the website. So before you went trudging through all of the detail, you could put in your top line details and know whether you met the first line criteria before embarking on what you guys have identified here is wasting your time on an application that's then rejected, and you don't know what your criteria for selection is in the first place. So let's take that second customer need, to understand the process and where I am. The design principle became simple signposted journeys. Example outcomes, an infographic, nothing radical in this, but boy, it was radical at the time. And certainly radical to the organization that thrived on stuffy, long-worded details that were buried in 1,000 different T's and C's. An infographic of the end-to-end process. And when you logged into your application, it showed you as a graphical representation of where you were in that process. And the final thing, this is probably the most powerful for me, is probably based on personal experience, but to access that meaningful real-time status. Well, what does that mean? They turn that into a design principle of real, accessible status. Now, they did a burst out on what real means, and it essentially was this: abandoning vague, in progress. Your status is in progress, or your status of your application is under review. And it was replaced, all terminology like that was replaced with expectation managed descriptions, such as this one. Your application is with Anna in our underwriting team in Leeds. We aim to have a decision for you by Tuesday, the 2nd of August. We will contact you by email before 1700 that day with our decision. Tick, 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 and tick against a whole plethora of those pain points that you guys identified from your own experience. Now that's generated from us, all that data was in the system already. It's revolving around SLAs, name of customer, name of agent. And all they've done is put it together in prose, which what a different experience for the customer that means. And just in that one phrase alone, you're solving lots of different pain points. So slightly more briefly, let's talk about the design principles at a program level. So done the process level, individual. Let's lift up to the program level. So what do I mean by program? I mean a collection of projects, initiatives, where you've got multiple things going on, multiple change and CI projects going on at the same time. So that sense of shared purpose is the same, but in this context, it can help unify and coordinate all of those different improvement activities that are going on. Joined up provides the link to the current organizational strategy. Now, here's a difference. Rather than being on the specific customer needs of that process, it could be the organizational strategy. And I'll show you very shortly one of the links to that. Same sentiment again, keeping the customer front and center of all improvement efforts. And why? So we can demonstrate constancy of purpose to our CI program and a commonality, the same flavor, if you like, regardless of the setting of that individual process, whether it's in manufacturing, customer service, or finance. What are the key things that make this our customer-centric program? So in asset management business, we came across this setting, the classic. Here's your corporate strategy objective: reduce the cost of production by 8% over 2 years. The improvement team was set this objective to identify and eliminate waste from in-house production processes. And rightly so. The team asked the question, okay, but where, that's our job, but where is the customer in all of this? And what they recognized was a risk of counterproductive improvement actions. In order to jump back to this 8% cut over 2 years, they recognized that they could inadvertently and unintentionally impact the customer through some of these initiatives that they could embark on in order to cut waste by 8% over 2 years. And what they were setting out to do here was ensuring that the customer was at the heart of all their improvement efforts. So far, so good. So what did they do with their improvement program here? The purpose of their improvement program became to reduce the cost of production and, underscore in bold, improve customer service by identifying and minimizing the causes of variation and waste. Again, so far so good. Who could argue with that? But how did they bring it to life? These customer needs were identified, again, through a similar process of interviewing, of actually going to talk to the customers, walking the customer's process, seeing what the customer did with the asset at the other end, which again was been built up over years of lots of assumptions, lots of expertise, some of which was right. So the customer described here that they wanted to feel listened to, translated into a design principle of involve the customer. Example outcome on this: they consulted on proposed equipment changes to ensure the unintended consequences were avoided. A huge cultural change for them. Their operation was a closed box. The customer issued them a spec, they manufacture, they maintain that asset to that spec in any way they saw fit within the limits of the law and technical possibilities. involving the customer to ensure that any changes they were proposing with equipment highlighted all kinds of different things that they weren't aware that the customer was then subsequently using the product for. It had been done on the power of assumption. And the second one's really interesting. So here's a customer need. We need you to be the most efficient supplier, which includes providing a quality product in these customer words that came out. So the design principle was translated as deliver what the customer values. I mean, we've all seen that. Of course, we all want to deliver what the customer values, but by having design principles and a rigorous understanding of the customer journey behind it, they're able to understand a completely new way of understanding what the customer wanted. And it involved, they had previously been operating to the contract, which the contract said, you must maintain this asset once a quarter. And by having conversations with the customer, they realized that that was not a customer requirement. It had been put in as a measure of mistrust in the contracting process, that the customer didn't trust the supplier to maintain their assets on an accurate, meaningful basis. So put in an arbitrary time, and if you had to report if you've done it or not, in, out, we'll pay you or we won't. So what this conversation, this exercise of generating the design principles generated was the revelation that the maintenance and the component could be changed on time, on a time-based principle instead of on a instead of simply sourcing a lower cost component to fit to that equipment. It was revelatory at the time. The contract had been the Bible. This was the guidance that you must meet within your manufacturing process. And actually, with those constructive conversations, that in-depth understanding, that got changed. So finally on this slide, reducing the cost of production by 8%. Now what I'm trying to do here is split the customer requirements here. This was a corporate strategy requirement. The design principle, eliminate avoidable waste. And indeed, by doing that and seeking that as the test against their improvement initiatives, combined with the others, they developed a very rounded approach to this and ultimately met the requirement of the strategic objective earlier, and within the 2 years, they ultimately exceeded it. So really interesting examples, quite different to one another. Quite conscious of the time also. So my final slide is around just some advice. Hopefully this has come out. Be pragmatic in the development. This is an additional tool. This is not the tool to understand your customer requirements. Experiment and be comfortable in not getting it right first time. Set aside your assumptions, listen to your customers in new and different ways, and remember to check the strategic fit/links. And that resonates through lots of the different items that I've mentioned. And that is my content in a whistle stop. Suze, over to you.
Thanks ever so much, Rich, and thank you to Warren for your help today. Rich mentioned at the beginning that we're taking a break in August for PMI Live. Rest assured, if you're having withdrawal symptoms, you can go to our Knowledge Hub on our website and you can watch all of our webinars in there, along with lots of other content. So we're coming back on the 30th of September with Raise the Bar, Drive Your Performance Excellence. And so in that PMI Live, we're going to be exploring the role that performance excellence has to play in addressing pressures such as increasing costs, supply shortages, skills constraints, and so on. So looking forward to seeing you then. It is available to register now, so please feel free. You can register from now on.
And for regular attendees, you will notice the difference. We are switching to Teams webinars from September as well. So if it looks different and feels different, that is correct.
Rich is now saying we've got some other great content that we've released this month. So Leading for Business Excellence podcast. I am talking to Tim Schmeiser, who is VP for Commercial Transformation at Kimberly-Clark. It's a really great interview. Please take really time to have, he's got some really interesting things to say about leadership and transformation. Also, in our latest Room for Improvement, we've got Justin Elford from Oxford Instruments, and he talks a little bit about some initial skepticism, which I know many people do have about continuous improvement, and how that kind of then gradually became replaced with an infectious enthusiasm as those tangible results start to reveal themselves. So do have a look at our Knowledge Hub. Both of these content for the Room for Improvement and the podcast are in the Knowledge Hub, as is all our collection of webinars. You can filter on that as well to make it very easy for you to find what you want. Look out for our Voice to Customer survey. You're going to be receiving that from us shortly. Obviously, always very grateful to get that from you, and all your feedback, suggestions for future topics, really, really helpful. So that's me for today, and that's the end of PMI Live. So on behalf of PMI, Rich, Warren, myself, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for joining us on the live streams. Look forward to seeing you in September. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.